impromptu debate. It is 9:14 in the morning for me, so the earliest debate I've ever done, and I'm joined today by. Do you want to be called Flying Gender or Rubble of Empires? What do you want to be called today?
Rubble of Empires.
Rubble of Empires. So
Or you can just call me Rubble, I guess, for short.
Rubble.
Yeah,
Okay. I feel like
yeah,
I'm on the Flintstones a little bit.
yeah.
All right, so I'm joined by Rubble today. So he made a response video to me, and me being the egotist that I am, I had to respond to it right away and challenge him to a debate. Battlefield of ideas. Here we go.
Woo!
Woo! All right. So to start us off, like, just kind of tell us anything you want. You can tell us about the video, what the video is about. You can tell us about your channel. Anything you want to tell us about yourself.
Sure. Okay. Um, I guess I have been a left-wing activist since I was like 17. Um, so yeah, I
How long is
have
that?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm 30, mid-30s now.
Okay.
I forget the exact math, but yeah, 34. Uh, so yeah, I guess nearly 20 years. And yeah, I came to activism through like a socialist organization. So I was always like used to having this dynamic of kind of fighting with the rest of the left, I guess, in a sense, like, or at least being aware that there was a kind of significant distinction between a like Marxist and a sort of bourgeois liberal, a kind of capitalist liberal in that sense. So that's where I'm coming to, or coming from yeah, I'm not sure how much detail to go into and that kind of thing, but that's sort of how I was first came across the trans thing. So I guess like, yeah, I guess I can maybe give you a little bit of a story about the first time I ever heard about transgenderism, which was during a educational sort of seminar day at the like socialist organization that I was a part of, and it was specifically a feminism day. And there were some older members there. I was like, I don't know, early 20s maybe, or mid 20s, and they sort of, you know, started talking about the idea of transgenderism, and that there were certain people who identified as women, and it was sort of the thing to do was to agree with that identification and support it. And yeah, at the time, the concept was so new to me that I didn't have any like, oh, fucking trans, or I wasn't, yeah, immediately hostile. But I guess I'm always immediately kind of skeptical to some extent. So I was just thinking like, oh, okay, well, what's to stop me from saying I'm a really liberated woman who doesn't care how much facial hair I have, and I'm really masculine. And so essentially, like, what's to stop me from just identifying as a woman? And I forgot this. It's sort of a thing that I remembered, but the response was basically, they didn't know, they didn't have an answer. They instead kind of segued to the story about like anti-trans activists being mean to trans women at a conference. So some kind of, you know, just kind of dodged the issue. And at the time I didn't realize the significance, but now having sort of been exposed to, yeah, what I see as, I call it gender theism, because I consider it to be, in some senses, a kind of secular religious belief, the idea that each individual person has an innate gender identity that kind of occupies them in a similar way to the way that Christians would think about a soul sort of inhabiting a body. And yeah, I don't know. I guess I've rambled on long enough without any feedback as to how that's going. So yeah, jump in.
Jump in. All right. So, would you consider yourself a TERF? Trans exclusive radical feminist. We're going hot with the labels right from the get go.
Sure. Probably not, in the sense that, I consider it a slur, essentially, and I would, in certain senses, like, ironically use it because it's been used against me and other people that I am sympathetic towards. But I wouldn't genuinely say, yeah, that's how I describe my politics, as like specifically excluding trans people, like that's the priority of them or anything like that. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems with your YouTube channel, gender identity debunked with Marxism, that seems to be a primary focus of your YouTube channel.
Is to what, sorry?
Gender identity debunked with Marxism seems to be a primary focus of your YouTube channel.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, yeah, debunking gender identity is definitely a primary focus of the channel, yes.
So do you think gender is a social construct?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So what is the problem with self-identification then?
What is self-identification?
Self-identification is identifying yourself. I know that's circular logic, but it's kind of the definition.
Yeah, but that's like, it can't be the definition. You can't have a circular definition. So what is self-identification?
It's identifying yourself. Like, this is who I am. It's like I'm trying to justify why you identify as a Marxist, right?
Right.
It's because you do. You find these ideas about either an ideology or about yourself to be convincing.
Oh, right. Yeah. But in that sense, there would be people who would disagree and say that what I'm saying is not Marxist at all. And I think that it's important for them to be able to say that.
It is, but do you think it's a kind of shitty thing to do, to deny someone their own self-identity? Do you think it's right? If I were to say that, no, you're not actually a Marxist because this isn't this, is that kind of shitty to you? Like denying
it depends
own...
how you it depends how you do it. I think it could be really helpful to me because, you know, for example, like one of the things I talk about is what's it called? The People's Temple, which was this cult in the 1960s in America, and it's where the Jonestown Massacre comes from, and yeah, what's significant about it is it's sort of there's other organizations or remnants of organizations like this that are still around, but it was this weird mix of like religious organization and political organization that was really progressive, way more progressive in a lot of senses than a lot of the organizations around them. And so in that sense, it made them very powerful at that time, because to bourgeois progressives specifically, being able to get a large group of people, and in particular a large multiracial group of people together, was really important.
Let's cut right to it. Do you think that the current trans movement is a cult or a religion? Do you think that's an apt comparison?
In some senses, I think it doesn't have a central organization like a cult, like a traditional sort of cult does. So in that sense, it's not a cult, in that I don't think that, each person has been individually recruited by a master overlord to become transgender. Instead, I think it's more akin to tarot card reading and
more akin to tarot card reading. If I were to tell you that there's scientific evidence backing tarot cards, would you start to think of it differently? Or would you have this a priori assumption that it's nonsense, and you would stick with that?
If you were to show me that tarot card reading did what, sorry?
So if I were to show you that tarot card readings actually had a scientific basis for existing, would you then change your opinion based on that new evidence, or would you kind of stick with your a priori assumption that it's nonsense?
It would depend. I would have to investigate it, like a fair bit, I guess, because I know that at various points in history, the scientific consensus on lots of social issues was completely off, and has been completely off. And to kind of assume that we have evolved past that point, especially when we're dealing with like very new issues that have never really come up before.
Yeah, no, of course. We have to go with what the science says at any given moment, and there's no reason to think that we won't change in the future.
But that's not, no. My point is, like, that's not my only consideration. If the science says this is something, then that's not something to completely ignore, but it's not something to go, oh, okay, well, the science says it, so let's go and do it, sort of thing. I think it's just a consideration. That's how I would incorporate it into my worldview. It's like, it's a potential lens. You like look through it to see to see things, but you don't necessarily go like, oh, we can do it, so we should kind of,
See, I'm very much, I guess you would call it an empiricist. I did really try to find empirical evidence to support my beliefs, and if I'm pretty good, and I think I would hope to think this is true, that I'm pretty good about changing my opinions based on new evidence. And all the evidence that I've been able to look into with trans people says that yes, there is a neurological basis. Like all available evidence points to a biologically determined identity. I'm reading off some of my notes from a previous debate here. So, for example, there are sex differences in the brain, but it's a literal spectrum of distributions, and so there's no such thing as a male brain or a female brain, but is a typical male brain and a typical female brain, and they found a lot of similarities and overlaps with trans women and cis women, and with trans men and cis men.
1 second. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sex differences in the brain. Okay. There's a typical female brain and a typical male brain.
Yes, but
those correspond.
Yeah,
but
also,
you're saying
I need to make it very clear that almost no one is typical. Like there's an amalgamation of different.
Right,
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, I guess like there is. I haven't done a lot of academic reading in that specific area, although I have done some. And one of the books that I read was Cordelia Fine's book. I forget the name of it. It's in my Doug Stanhope video. Sorry, I'll just quickly look it up. It's like Delusions of Gender is the main title, and that's an academic basically looking at neuroscience. She has a series, Testosterone Rex, I think, is the next one, which I have but haven't read yet. And she basically argues the opposite and says that even the distinctions between male and female brains that people argue, like even along the lines that you're saying, that there's like a tendency for a male brain to do this and a female brain to do that. It's all like, it's a kind of
it's a collection.
pseudoscience.
No, it's a collection of averages. And any honest interpretation will say that no, you cannot take an individual brain and identify its gender. You can only take it. You can only look at for whatever you can, male versus female brains, and I'm putting that in very heavy air quotes, by an amalgamation of averages. So there's going to be a vast spectrum of almost a limitless degree of factors that go into kind of determining that. Now, we do know that there are certain areas of the brain that determine our self-expression and our identity and how we interact with the world, and those are important in determining your self-identification. So there is a biological basis for self-identification as well. So, because
hey, whoa. There's a biological basis for self-identification.
There's a biological basis for everything. Like, everything we do is biological. There's nothing that we do that is not biological. Everything comes from our brains.
Sure, but there are also... Okay, yeah, true. But there are also cultural things, right?
Yes, and how we interact with culture is biological, right? Like, we humans as a species, we are built to be to maintain homeostasis, and that means interacting with the environment. So
Right.
so the way we interact with culture is biologically determined. Everything is biologically determined because that's how we function as a species.
No. Well, I mean, I can kind of see, like, yeah, it's a weird way of saying that, like, everything is biologically determined. Like, everything is done by a biological thing.
Well, can you think of anything that you've done that could not be possible biologically?
Yeah, heaps. Like wanting a PlayStation. Yeah, a lot. Very many things I can think of.
Why do you think that you wanting a PlayStation is not biologically driven?
Because it's a social construct, and like so many different things about like what a PlayStation does.
Yeah,
what
do you think there's anything in your brain that says that you want certain social constructs, that you want certain Skinner box style rewards through video games? Like, video games give us joy, it gives us pleasure, it activates pleasure centers in our brain. So of course you would seek out something that gives you those.
Sure. But in a culture, okay, but my point is that in a culture where I already know what video games are, if someone comes to me and presents me with a brand new PlayStation 12, I'm going to go, oh my God, this is the best thing I've ever seen in the world. And like you say, the things in my brain that do rewards and all that same type of stuff are going to make me want the PlayStation. But if I go to another person who doesn't have electricity, hasn't been outside of a forest, so they don't even have those people like with no depth perception, because and say, here's a PlayStation 12, they're not going to be like, oh my God, like I really want that.
Right. So they haven't built up this prior knowledge. They don't know what that is. That's why it's still biological.
Right. So it's socially determined. Whether how they're going to react to it is determined by the society they grew up in.
Of course, I'm not saying society doesn't have an enormous impact on how you function. I'm saying that how you participate in society does have a biological basis. Like the way you react is.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. Yeah. I just wanted to. It was sort of like vague, I guess, or not vague. I guess I wasn't sure of what you were exactly trying to say, so I was just kind of hashing that out.
Yeah. Yeah, so to reiterate, I want to say that everything that we do is biological. I mean that literally. That's not a turn of phrase. Like, everything we do is based on neurological connections and physical connections in our brain. Like, every decision we make is, there's a physical structure behind it, with neurotransmitters, with endocrine glands and things like that. Yeah. So, I'm saying that we have studied this a little bit. Now, the research is still new, but the research does seem to point to the fact that identity, gender identity specifically, which is a separate type of identity, is biologically determined. And yes, there is the ways we interact with culture to that, but still, that's why we can have a large range of gender expressions, but still have a definite gender.
Right.
And to me, that supports all sorts of identities, including non-binary people, because of course everything is on a spectrum, and all of these, so like BSTC,
but why,
white matter, gray matter.
You just said that. Hang on. You just said, of course, everything is on a spectrum. Mm-hmm. I don't agree with that assumption. Why is it obvious everything is on a spectrum? And what do you mean by everything is on a spectrum?
For example, white matter microstructure. So a white matter microstructure known as mean diffusivity of men and women is on average very different, or different enough.
Sorry, I don't know what that is.
There's a part. Okay. Let's say there's a part in your brain. Because I'm not 100% sure what this means either. It's something that I looked up in science. Let's say there's a part in your brain. Let's make it super simple, and that part is on average quite different between men and women. But that doesn't. Yeah. Yes, but there is a huge range that part can encounter. So different levels of brain stuff, keeping it super simple. All right, and that means that a lot. Yeah, and so there's going to be a large a bimodal distribution between men and women, to the point where, yes, trans people can definitely exist based on this if they fall on one end of the spectrum. And by that, so do non-binary people. Yep. So go ahead, yeah.
So, okay, by that logic, non-binary people can also exist. Right. All I would say, and, maybe we need to, have this conversation again in a couple of months or whatever, or, I don't know, in some time, because, what you're saying does sound very reminiscent of the stuff that is explored in Delusions of Gender, and in particular, the things you were saying about the the different sizes in the white matter. And like, I don't mean to.
What I just gave you was very oversimplified. Of course, gender isn't that.
Yeah. No. And that's totally. I totally understand that. But yeah, I don't mean to devalue like empirical evidence at all, because I am going to use a lot of it, I think, to make arguments. So I understand, wanting to get good data, but obviously data is only as kind of good as the context that you can sort of like, that you're aware of what you're implementing it into. And that's sort of
right. You need a framework to put that in.
That's why I included that kind of bit on the stolen generations in the video, because it was like, on the latest science at the time, stealing all the Aboriginal children, as like twisted as it sounds, was what was like the most enlightened thing to do. And so in that context, I think like sometimes, even if the science says this is what we should be doing, sometimes you just have to go like, I don't know. Sometimes there has to be other considerations, and I'm not really sure what the answer in that context is, because I think that's a kind of broader, like, I don't know, probably even spiritual question, which is kind of ironic considering I'm accusing other people of being religious. But my point is that like, I understand what you're saying in regards to white matter and brain differences. What I'm saying in response to that is, I don't have enough knowledge about it to, rebut what you were saying. And like what you also sort of acknowledged, you were kind of vague on some of it too. So all I would say is read Cordelia Fine's book, and I'll read like whatever you want to send me to read as well. And maybe we can have like a really good discussion in a little bit. Okay.
Yeah, that's fair.
That's fair. Cool.
I'd like to do even more research on this myself, so I'm not giving such vague answers, because I have here. I'll give you the article that right now.
Sure.
So I'm sending it to you on Skype. All right, this is the article that I'm primarily basing all my sources, and I looked up all of these studies independently. So all the sources that they gave in that, I looked up all those sources independently. And granted, this was about a month and a half ago, so I'm having trouble remembering a lot of the specifics, but I did take notes.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, cool. Well, yeah, because I mean, like I said in my video, like I could kind of tell you know your way around statistics way better than I do. So I don't like, I'm not really in a position to to counter that. But yeah, it would be cool to get your opinion on like Cordelia Fine's work and the research that she uses in that, and like whether her stats are all made up.
Can we go really quick back to the genocide justified by science? Can we go back to that really quick?
Yeah.
So in my opinion, the best way to stop things like that is to have an educated public and to have scientific information be distributed as freely as possible, so it can be challenged, and especially so we can do replication studies. Because in my opinion, the biggest flaw in science right now is the lack of replication studies, just because they don't get funding. So no one wants to do a study again to see if it's true. The only research done is like to find new information, and it's a huge flaw in science, in my opinion. So the more we disseminate scientific knowledge, and the more people are educated enough to understand it and to be able to do it themselves, the better our scientific understanding is going to be. And of course, we need to have strong ethical boards to be in place to make sure that we're not harming people in the basis of that science. So science has come a long way.
Yeah, I think there's also like other kind of considerations too to bring into place, like where it's like. I don't know. There's just kind of things about, that are outside of science in terms of human interactions where, like everyone was just kind of broken at their core seeing like baby jails that Trump was running, which are like a ripoff of an Australian idea, which we do to refugees. So we've been crazy and racist for a long time. But everybody kind of saw that and went like, oh man, like stealing a baby of a mother is just like something that like, people
you can't prove that that's wrong scientifically. I would agree with that statement.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think there are a lot of kind of things, with that. Like, I don't think like, in terms of that wouldn't have helped the Aboriginal people necessarily to have their own study, because they had their own study. They had their own like hundreds of successful societies that, you know, to anyone who actually wanted to see the evidence, they could have gone like,
how long ago was this?
This is about 200 years ago, I think. The colonization.
So scientific progress has come in a long, long way since then. Now, of course, we're not perfect. If 200 years from now, we're going to look back on the science that we've done and think of it as like cute and primitive. But still, it's you know, it's all.
If we're still here, if climate change hasn't like wiped us out in 30 years.
Yeah, we'll see. I guess that's true. So let's get into a little bit more, because I am mostly interested in on my channel. The reason I didn't want to do a response video to you is because I really don't like just giving my feelings on a lot of topics. I try to base it in empirical evidence, and when I can't find empirical evidence, find the best reasoning I can. So that's why I want to do a live debate, so we can kind of hash this out in real time.
Yeah. And even with my video, I had to ask you questions to even be able to do it. So yeah, I definitely know there are advantages to actually talking to someone. Definitely.
Yeah, of course. So do you want to continue talking about gender identity and I guess trans ideology, or do you want to jump into the video? Because I'm having fun talking about trans ideology and why I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Well, have you watched any of my videos, like any of, apart from the like Gushin one, or
I'm sorry, I can't say. I watched the Gushin one, and I watched the one that you obviously I watched the response video that you made to me, but I apologize.
Right.
I haven't watched anything else.
Oh no. Yeah, like I said, I haven't really watched many of your videos either, but sorry. What were we talking about?
Do you want to keep talking about gender identity and I guess ideology, or do you want to jump into the video?
Yeah. No, we can keep talking about ideology for a while. Yeah.
Okay. So all the research that I really like basing my opinions in empirical data whenever I can. And when I can't, I try to make it as logically consistent as possible. All the research that I've seen points to the fact that supporting trans people and their gender identities result in immeasurably improved outcomes.
Sure. And on that basis, like, I totally understand, you know, if you're getting, you know, the dominant message from society is this is a good thing. All the scientific evidence you can find says this is a good thing. And some small group of crazy people on YouTube are like, this is a bad thing and it's going to kill everybody, or, you know, whatever extreme sort of parody of that. I can totally understand why you are dismissive and don't think that there's value to these ideas, I guess. So yeah, that makes sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you support trans people in their right to identify how they want? Do you support the protections that would entail?
Well, I think one of the videos that I made was called Sex Blind Trans Inclusion. And I think that that's an interesting kind of concept to explore, because the concept of being, say, racially blind, you know, the old kind of like I don't see race way of looking at the world, in some contexts, like, is the progressive way to look at the world, to not see people's race. But then in other senses, it's kind of like racist to not see people's race and not like it's kind of like somehow divorce their humanity from that aspect of themselves somehow.
Yeah, of course. You can you can say that you should treat all races equally while still recognizing that that's not going to be true of everyone. And the way society is built, your race is going to impact how you interact with society. So you can recognize both the fact that the race realism is not a scientifically valid pursuit, while also recognizing that the social construct of race is enormously important.
Yes.
Especially for marginalized groups. So of course, yeah. Definitely.
So in that context, or in that sense, like, I think there's like, so if we go, what's an example? We're trying to put on an event and we say like it's racially blind in when we're putting it on, so we're not going to distinguish between like the racial characteristics of the participants, and in that sense it's going to be good. And like progressive. Or you could make the case of like, for example, I know they do this in Canada. In Australia, we do like a welcome to country, where anytime anyone like meets in a kind of public setting, you acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that you're meeting on. And so that, in a sense, is kind of, bringing race into the equation and doing racial things. But in a sense, it's like better to not be racially blind in that context and recognize the legacy of, white supremacy. So I think there's a similar thing that happens with sex. So in some senses, to not recognize the original sex of a person can be very progressive. And to just, obviously you can imagine contexts in which that's true.
Mm-hmm.
But
I think trans people are pretty open about being trans, though, right?
It depends. Fallon Fox, knocked unconscious 2 women before she was like open about being trans.
Yeah, and then she lost a fight too, right? I guess that's okay. We're gonna go ahead and jump into this. So you kind of
Sorry, that was like off the cuff. I didn't mean to do that.
No, that's okay. That's okay. We can get back into this a little bit later, but this is I guess the real reason that we're talking about, right? So for people who don't know, so I had in my trans activist versus facts video, which is a facetious title. I was playing a character, I promise. So I had a 45-second clip where I was responding to something Joe Rogan said about Fallon Fox, and it was a joke, and you acknowledged that it was a joke and that it wasn't the main thesis of the video, but you still decided that was worth making a response video too, and is that fair? Is that fair? The characterization that I've said so far?
Definitely, yep.
Yeah, okay. So let's go into that a little bit. So what, and just pretend that I haven't seen it. What were your problems with what I said in the video?
Shit. Okay. Okay. So the first point was that it was kind of your point. Essentially, I felt you were saying the Fallon Fox thing was like a trivial gotcha. Like it doesn't really matter, this question. And I think that that's not true. I think that like if Fallon Fox doesn't matter, then trans sports in general doesn't matter, or it's one or the other kind of thing. And if it's not that important, then why are there all these broken skulls?
So in the broader context of the video, I'm talking about trans rights and bad science that people use against trans people. So in the broader context, it kind of doesn't matter. Like this one instant is just part of a greater whole. And what I was really interested in is bad science.
That's for you, because you're approaching it from the idea that you're like, just in my opinion, for you see it like that because you're on a holy quest to see trans rights implemented. And so this one thing that you see as like a hiccup that can just be like skipped over. It seems like that. It's just like, oh yeah, I don't know, that lady was crying when we stole her babies. I don't know, I'm just going to drive off.
What I was objecting to, and maybe this didn't come across in the video, is that people were using Fallon Fox to say that, trans people aren't, like trans women aren't real women. Look at Fallon Fox. And people were using that as a bludgeon. And I think that's extraordinarily disingenuous.
Okay. I don't, because the whole trans women are women thing is like this thing where it's very unconditional under no circumstances. It doesn't matter how out of control things get. It doesn't matter that this person is a convicted murderer. It doesn't matter if this, what the context is. It's like trans women are women, trans women are women.
Do you think that someone's identification and should be contingent upon them not being a murderer? Like if a trans woman commits a crime.
I think their identification in certain circumstances, depending on what it is, I don't think what they identify as should be considered at all. Not that it shouldn't be considered just when the person is a murderer.
Okay, so do you let's bring it back to Fallon Fox a little bit, because I'm getting
sure.
All right, so continue to say you said that I kind of glossed over that because I thought it was a weak point, right? Is that your contention?
yeah, I thought that like yeah, to some extent, I thought that like maybe you would be yeah, no, that's true. Yep. Yep.
Okay,
More or less.
more or
Yeah.
less. All right, so I actually made a second video on testosterone in sport. Did you get a chance to see that one? Or did we?
No, I'm gonna get pwned. Yeah, no, I haven't.
Okay, so I actually have a graduated cum laude with a degree in kinesiology, which is exercise science. I was a personal trainer for 7 years, and I'm currently pursuing my master's degree in biomechanics. So I actually I do
Okay.
know quite a bit about sport.
Mm. Right, that's hilarious.
So I did a video on testosterone sport, and a lot of people think that testosterone is this magical MacGuffin, and that the more you have of it, the more athletic you are, when almost the opposite is true. So the way our endocrine system works is the more athletic you are and the more you rely on testosterone, the more your receptors that your body makes for it, and actually the lower your levels of testosterone are, assuming you don't, inject yourself with, anabolic steroids or anything like that. So the athletes with the lowest levels of testosterone tend to be the ones that we think of as the toughest. So powerlifters, for example, in the study that I cited in the testosterone sport video, powerlifters typically have the lowest levels of testosterone of any athlete because they rely on testosterone so much, their body gets extremely efficient at using it. And so testosterone is not the end-all be-all of sports performance.
Okay.
And in the case of trans women competing in sport, I think as right now, I think I agree with the general guidelines that they have been transitioned for and on hormones for 2 years. I think I agree with that right now. Or what I'm doing.
So when you watch Fallon Fox's, like I couldn't find all of them, but there's only 6 fights. When you watch those fights, you don't see anything wrong when you're watching them. You're like, yeah, this looks essentially akin to two like cis women fighting. That's what this looks like to me.
I think it looked like it was someone who was very, very strong fighting someone who wasn't as strong. No, I would admit that, yeah. But is she
Okay.
outside of the possible range of a cis woman?
Okay. What did you think of Tamika Brent's comments?
I think she has the right to think what she wants to think. What I'm looking for is there a scientific reason? Is there a reason why doctors cleared her to compete?
Right.
So
Well, I guess
that's
criteria, but I don't know if that's reasons.
Yeah, I trust the opinions of doctors more than I trust my own, right?
Not necessarily, but like, yeah, like doctors are an important consideration, but yeah, I don't necessarily trust a doctor more than I trust my own.
Okay, so you kind of took issue with the fact that I seem to say that clearly anecdotes are all we need to know the facts, right?
Yeah.
While I was using an anecdote to make a point, right?
Yeah, essentially, yeah.
Yeah, I was doing that on purpose, right?
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, I didn't.
So I was doing it on purpose to show that just because she lost this one fight doesn't really mean anything because it's an anecdote.
Sure.
So that's what I was saying. Like the
but
example
I
of
didn't
Fallon
think that
Fox.
came across. I didn't think that came across. Like I think like, or at least in the presentation of it, it seemed like you were kind of saying, so therefore, like they're equal because look at her lose for these 7 seconds.
Yeah, she lost the fight. If you lose the last 7 seconds, you still lose the fight, right?
Sure, but it was the longest fight that she had ever participated in. That was interesting, I thought. I don't have the stats at the moment, but it's something like all the other fights were really, really short, like less than 60 seconds, except for 1 or 2. And then the fight that she lost was like 4 minutes something and 3 rounds long. And that was obviously, to me, because she was, in my opinion, fighting a man, and he's an unfit man, which was evident in the Tamika Brent's fight where the commentators were like, he's out of breath, like in the first round. And so she obviously took the strategy of, I'm going to make him like run around the ring until
let's not misgender Fallon Fox, all right? We're on my channel, so I want to make you
okay, yeah, sure, okay, yeah, okay, yeah, I'm going to make her run around the ring, and yeah, and then she was able to do a submission as opposed to the like KOs and oh no, was it? I don't know. I don't remember. Anyway, yeah, I think that played a factor.
I think.
Oh, right. I think it was a TKO. Yeah, but I don't even really know what the distinction between that and a KO is.
Oh,
so,
KO is like
anyway.
you're like dropped. A TKO is you are at the point where you can't defend yourself adequately anymore, and the referee steps in to keep things from getting out of hand.
Yeah.
Okay, so we could draw parallels to like men's UFC. We can find instances of fighters like knocking out all their opponents in the first round, right? Do you think that means that they are like unduly outmatched, like they're too strong to compete? Should there be an upper strength level in UFC, do you think?
Can you find examples of of male fighters?
Well, I'd only have to find one, right? In order to, show a parallel between that and Fallon Fox, I only need to find one, right?
Well, that's a parallel, but I don't know if that proves anything.
I don't know if it proves anything either. What I'm saying is that there is a range of strength, and do you think that there should be an upper limit on strength in fighting? There are women out there who can bench press 500 pounds. Should they be allowed to fight?
Right, and one of them, the funny thing is one of them is Tamika Brents, and she's a fighter, and she's fought heaps of women. And she said, this fighting, like, Fallon Fox was like nothing I've ever experienced before. But because she's not like a peer reviewed paper, that doesn't count for anything. And we're arguing about upper strength limits of fighting. No, I don't think there should be upper strength limits of fighting. Yes, I do think that all sports should be sex segregated.
Well, they are. We just let trans people compete in the sports of their gender.
But not, but their gender, I don't believe in their gender, so.
You can not believe in it, but why do doctors disagree with you? Why did doctors allow trans people to compete in their gender? Do you think there's some kind of ideological motivation?
Why did doctors tell women their ovaries would explode when they wanted to vote in the 1920s?
Because that was what they were doing on science at the time, and we've had new science. Just because you can find instances in the past where science has been wrong, we've grown since then. Science is always getting better.
Yeah, I know, but the point is like we've grown, but at the 1920s, we were growing then too. And you would have pointed to things in the 1870s, and people would have gone like, oh, no, we couldn't be wrong about this ovaries thing because we've grown so much since the 1870s. It's the same thing. Like, yeah, obviously, we can still make catastrophic mistakes, like thalidomide, whole bunch of babies, like, all born without limbs and stuff. That happened pretty recently.
Yeah, how do we know that was bad? How do we know how to stop that? Because we continue to do scientific research, and we'll continue to do scientific research on this. To my knowledge, there's been one study that compared pre- and post-transition athletes, and what they found was, and now granted, this was in runners. One study does not prove the overall all of sports, but what they found was that if you are in the, let's say, 20th percentile when you're competing with men, after you transition for the allotted amount of time, you'll probably be around the 20th percentile when competing with women. Now granted, that is just one study, and it was just on runners. So I want to see more scientific research too. But what I'm going to err on is the side of supporting the rights of trans people.
Yeah, but again, you're using that in a sex-blind way.
I'm not using it in a sex-blind way.
Yes, you are, because you're... Okay. Well done. All right, okay. How am I going to word this then? I think that the way that you're using it is sex blind because you're refusing to acknowledge the sexes of the people that we are talking about.
Do you think sex is like... I'm having confused here. I'm acknowledging this. When I say trans woman, if we're going to go by the biological definition, sure, I'll acknowledge their sex, but I'm also acknowledging their gender. And their phenotype is what's important, not their genotype, right? The reason we separate sexes by sport...
Hang on. I think if you're getting kicked in the head, then probably what their body is matters more than how they perceive
Do you understand
themselves.
The difference between genotype and phenotype?
No, I don't.
Genotype is your genes. So that would be like your
Yeah.
chromosomes, and
Yep.
phenotype is like the way, like the attributes that your body has as a result of your genes and your interaction with the environment. So we
Okay.
don't
Sure.
separate sexes because they have different chromosomes. We separate them because they have different phenotypes. And men are typically larger and stronger, and that's why we separate them. It's not based on genotype. It's not based on sex, as you say. It's based on phenotype, and the phenotype is what we're concerned
No, no,
with.
no, 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 no. It all depends. It all depends though, because in certain contexts we separate, like, or potentially we separate along
And so we're talking about
the
sport right now, though, right?
yeah,
So
but that's one of the
we had sex
sure, sure,
separation. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
yeah.
I'm interrupting you. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's okay. Yeah, no, you go, you go.
I'm gonna say we discovered chromosomes, sex chromosomes, in I think 1911. I could be wrong. I know it was the early 1900s. We had sex
Okay.
separation in sports for hundreds of years before that. So the reason we
Right.
separated sports was not based on sex, as you say. It was not based on chromosomes. It was based on phenotype. So if the phenotype of someone changes just to the point where they can be within ranges of the gender they were not assigned at birth, I see no reason why it's not fair for them to compete with that gender.
Right. Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I mean, I think if you could, if you could make that argument that they were that they didn't have an advantage, then I would be sympathetic, I guess, or more sympathetic to that position. But I think that from what I can see, um, that there clearly is a difference.
Why do you think that trans women haven't dominated the Olympics?
I don't know. It's pretty new.
It's been, I think,
And
hold on, IOC trans policy, IOC transgender policy. Yeah, it was until 2004 they allowed transgender athletes to compete in the Olympic Games. So it's been
sure.
15 years.
Yeah, yeah, but like, I don't know, like because of the nature. Well, I don't know. I just thought that even though there's been 15 years, the it's a small group of people, and you're trying to get Olympic athletes. And so the correlation for how many people are actually going to make it into like Olympic events.
Yeah, Olympic
And
events
then
skim off the top of the top of the top, right? Every country wants to send their absolute best. So if there really
sure,
was this,
sure.
like, yeah, so if there really was, like, if trans women were like just dominating in their sport without even
But
trying.
if you have trans women to do it with, or if you have trans women who are athletic enough to do it with, like in terms of in Australia, if I was to hazard a guess, like there are a number of a significant number of like trans women, but the number of trans women that are Olympic athletes is not very high. So it's not like there's two pools of like, oh, we could take all these Olympic trans athletes or these cis women. There's just only cis women there at the moment and I'm not, yeah. So I think it's a factor, and it'll probably play into it seems like we're having this sort of like discussion as a society now as to how far this is going to go, because this was kind of one of the discussions that used to be too absurd to consider. Like, say 10 years ago, I feel like if I was to talk to people about trans stuff, I would give this type of example, like, hey, what about a UFC fight and a woman, and they'd be like, oh, it's never going to get to UFC fights. It's just about toilets and respecting people's rights and keeping people safe and that kind of thing. And now, yeah, like there are all these fractured skulls and
All these
like
fractured skulls.
yeah. Oh, well, there's one all these fractured skulls. There's one very badly fractured skull. There's a lot of other injuries. There's a lot of people who've missed out on opportunities as a result of
Losing.
not being able
of course
to
you miss out on opportunities if you lose, right? That's kind of how
to
sports
male
works.
competitors in a female
To
competition
trans women competitors
who are male. You acknowledge they're male, right?
who have fit all the requirements to compete with other women.
Yeah, they're still male.
They're still women.
Yeah, I mean, I disagree with that. I don't think they are women.
Okay. When you say woman, are you referring to sex or gender?
I'm referring to, well, it depends how you're using those terms, I guess.
I think
When I say woman, I am referring to adult human females, regardless of their gender identity.
okay,
When I say man, I'm referring to adult human males, regardless of their gender identity.
Okay, unfortunately, the well has been poisoned a little bit with male and female, so a lot of people do use that definition to shit on trans women, so I don't like it for that reason. But I will acknowledge that there is a sex, difference. Okay, so I will acknowledge that a trans woman's biological sex. I know. I'm agreeing with you here. So I'm going to agree that a trans woman biologically has XY chromosomes and is a male, but they're still a woman because that is what gender is. They're transgender.
Hang on, because that is what gender is. That's
a social construct.
Unpack that. Right. So, yeah, okay, but this is about a competition for females, and it gets.
No, it's a competition for women. We've kind of already established that we don't separate based on chromosomes.
No. Yeah. Like I disagree with that. That's a kind of I just need a second to think about why that is. They were using phenotype to identify females before they were able to use anything else. And still predominantly they use phenotype to identify females because it
they exclusively used phenotype, right?
Sorry?
They exclusively used phenotype to identify women.
Sure, yes. And they were and it was correct, I guess. But like it was like my point is it wasn't they were using phenotype to identify women, but what they were trying to identify was genotype, because women are the reproductive sex class of society. And so the reason why there's a gender binary is because they needed to separate out the people who were used for breeding, essentially, from the people who were going to be like the patriarchs of the society. That's where like the gender binary comes from. That's what you're trying to smash when you're smashing the binary.
Okay. You realize that we could also use this argument to say that people used to think that black people were a different race of, like, not even humans, right? So kind of going back to your arguments earlier.
They did say that. Yep.
Yeah,
so what about them saying that is similar to what I'm saying?
They were trying to identify something deeper than surface level traits.
Right, but they were whereas they weren't in the case of black people. They were just where blackness came from my understanding, is from the United States and slavery, and like as a concept, in terms of I'm actually it might even predate it in like Jamaica and like those slave societies.
To stay a little bit on topic, what I was trying to use that point to make was that sex segregation or gender segregation in sport is not based on chromosomes. It's not based on genotype. It's based on phenotype. It's based on how those attributes manifest themselves.
They traditionally use phenotype to try and find the genotype. Does that make sense?
Right.
No.
They didn't know genotype was the thing. They just knew that there were differences between. Sure.
They didn't know. They wouldn't have conceived of it as a genotype, obviously, because it was outside of their conception. But there was things that they were trying to identify that were broader than just the surface appearance of femininity or femaleness. Particularly considering like when it goes, this is determined by I don't know. Yeah. This has been an interesting discussion. We're kind of getting up to about an hour. We can keep going. I'm just sort of waning a little bit, I guess.
You're waning a little bit.
Yeah.
All right, let's get into some real meat and potatoes type of things.
Sure.
Right when you're at your weakest is when I strike.
Yeah. Good move.
I was about to say it. So, do you think sex is binary?
I think that is a binary. Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
All right, so binary means only two options, right?
Yeah, but it's kind of like, I guess, probably more akin to essentially what you were kind of saying with like the clusters. So it's binary in the sense that like a male and a female are required for reproduction, and most people are like
That kind of implies that there's like a design.
Most people, sorry.
So that kind of implies like there's a design, and we ought to separate based on reproduction.
Oh, no. I'm just saying that that's what, I mean, I think there are certain contexts in which it makes sense to separate on the basis of reproduction, obviously. Like, yeah.
Well, if we separated based on reproduction, we would have like...
Okay, on the basis of reproduction, if it's okay to separate...
We would have three sexes, right? Those who can provide fertile sperm, those who can provide a fertile egg, and those who cannot provide either. That would be a fair separation on the basis of reproduction.
They're not a different sex, though, in the sense that, like, you know, most dogs have...
Yeah, I was saying, if that's how we're defining sex, though, based on reproduction.
I know, but I'm trying to give you an example of why your analogy doesn't work. Like a dog has four legs, but if I chop a dog's leg off and it has, or chop two of a dog's leg,
you'd be altering phenotype, not genotype. I'm still talking about genotype.
Okay.
So if we define if we define sex by reproduction only, we have people who can provide a fertile sperm, people who can provide a fertile egg, because that's what we need for reproduction, and there are people who can't provide either.
It also depends. Like sex, like sex doesn't mean like they can always. Also, I guess I want to clarify too. Just that, like, you will likely have gone through a period of fertility during your lifetime.
Likely, but that doesn't include everybody, though, right?
No, it doesn't.
That's why I'm really trying to get into how do we define sex. If it's by reproduction, there's more than two. Yeah, if it's by chromosomes, there's more than two. All six markers of biological sex, none of them are binary.
More than two. Sorry, what's the other reproduction sex?
Neither.
What's the other
Yeah? Neither. There are people who exist, and they are real, who cannot provide a fertile sperm or a fertile egg. And so if we define sex, this is not how I do it. I'm saying if we did do this, it would make logical sense to say there's a third who, if that's the only criteria, then it's neither.
Then hang on, would you do that for any other species? Like, would you go, oh, there's male dogs, female dogs, and then there's a third species of both male and female third sex of both male and female.
Yeah. Of course we could do that. Like we decide how we define things, right?
That's not how sexes work.
Well, how does sex work? Is there we get to decide how we define things, right? We get to decide how we identify things. So I'm saying if reproduction
haven't done that with animals up until now,
because we don't define sex solely based on reproduction. There are a lot of other factors.
Okay. Yep.
And we go by what is typical, but there's no reason to. But if we go by what's typical, then there's no sex binary. None of the six physiological markers of sex are binary. There's always more than two options that exist in the broad population. So you can't have a binary with exceptions. You can't have zeros and ones, but occasionally there's a two.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think that what you're like, it's similar to the thing that you were trying to do with the brain matter thing of like, it's clusters. So
bimodal distribution is what most people will say. That's what I agree with.
Okay. Yeah. So I think there's a similar thing happening with sex. Like it's clustered around, like any individual kind of example can like vary, but like there are 2 points at which like people can cluster around, and that's male and female. There's no third thing that your body can be trying to do but not quite achieve. You know, because that's what it's doing when there's an infertile male and an infertile female. It's not trying to make a third sex.
It's because because we haven't defined a third sex, but if we defined it, it then would exist.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah. Well, I don't know. This is like, yeah, we just kind of, I guess, got a little bit further. I don't know. Yeah, I'm ready. I'm ready to like call it a day, I guess.
Okay.
But this has been really, really fun.
Yeah, I've had fun.
Yeah, cool. Well, yeah, if you want to like I'm sort of a bit buzzing because I haven't like, you know, done this before. So I'll probably take a little time to, you know, decompress, but I'll definitely send you through the like resources that I was talking about and send me through your stuff. And yeah, maybe we can do this again.
Yeah, sure. Let's do
Yeah.
it. We can do it again in a month or so, or a couple of weeks, right?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, we'll see. I'm not sure exactly, but yeah, that would be cool.
Cool.
Yeah, awesome, man. Thanks. This was really fun, and you were really like, I don't know, a good interviewer, and kept me from rambling too much and helped me set everything up and stuff. So yeah, thanks heaps for that, and thanks everyone for listening. And yeah, I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, I appreciate your time. All right, you have a good one.
Cool, no worries. Thanks, you too.
All right, y'all. How did we do? I know I screwed up a lot of some of my terminology there, and I apologize for that. So I did the best I could. Let's rate my performance. Everybody, tell me what I could have done better at. This person. So I have no idea how to pronounce your name. PH43. PH43. I'm sorry. He is RubbleOfEmpires. He has a YouTube channel that I'm going to link in the chat if you guys want to go check him out. So this guy did a response video to me, and prior to that, the reason he knows who I am is because he did a response video to Gushin, someone that I really, really like online, and he was kind of shitty to her, and he misgendered her a little bit, and I wanted to debate him after that. He challenged her to a debate, and I kind of wanted to jump in there too. I'd never want to step on anybody's toes, but I also don't like it when people have to defend like their very existence and identity. So it's one of the reasons that I spend so much time debating trans issues is because I want someone who, like, this isn't my identity. I don't have to defend something that is within me. And I think for certain people, a lot of people are going to just use that as like a genetic fallacy, like, oh, you only care about trans rights because you are trans, and they're going to dismiss them unfairly because of that. And so I don't know if I'm explaining myself correctly, but I think it's important for me to step in there. Oh, fear death. Gotcha. Yeah. I'll answer any questions you guys have. Did he use the Sharon Davies tactic of humanity can only survive on an island with a male and a female? He didn't actually use that, no. Yeah, Groundhog, I was imprecise on that. This was really, really impromptu. So I woke up at 6 a.m. And saw that he had finished his response video to me. And then I got in touch with him like right after that, and this was a really impromptu stream. So I knew normally I have a few days or a few weeks to prep and take notes and really get down on what my arguments are going to be, but this time it was really impromptu. So I was a little bit nervous that I would run into some issues during that, but with the explanation of women in sport, it's something that I need to do even more research on. I did a video on testosterone in sport, but that's not exactly the same thing. Yeah, I kind of agree. Is definitely of a certain persuasion with his video content. Didn't need it. Dumpstered him. Whew. That was a hell of a way to start the morning. Yeah, I think I'm gonna. So I have today off. I'm gonna work on a video on the Lisa Littman study of rapid onset gender dysphoria. So kind of related, very lightly to what we were talking about here. It's at 3,000 words so far, and I probably have another 3,000 to write. Can be so unprepared. Yeah. Well, we kind of agreed to. Yeah, Groundhog. We kind of agreed to at the end there to do some research. So I'll read the stuff that he sends me as long as it's free or reasonably affordable. Like, and I'm gonna send him some studies that I've prepared, and I'll scour around for some studies for him to read. So yeah, I don't want to dictate anybody else's identity, and that is kind of tough. I try to. It's hard to find a balance between being a good ally and not stepping on other people's toes. It's why I'm a little bit more comfortable doing stuff on my channel rather than like jumping into other people's DMs and telling them like what to do. So you need to be careful when calling trans women and male female. I know that's something that I know. I apologize, Jonathan. Uh I was trying to sort of use language that he was using, but I realized that that's why I was uncomfortable using that. So, yeah, I don't like saying male and female anymore because it's so poisoned, and because it's it isn't accurate anymore. So I apologize for that. Yeah, like sincerely, Jonathan and Fear of Death and Groundhog. Thank you for the criticism. It actually does mean a lot to me. I don't want to do a bad job with this stuff, so it means a lot to me that I get as much as I can right. And when I don't get right, thank you for like telling me. Yeah. So yeah. All right. Any last questions? Thank you, Jonathan. Love to you too. I'm gonna less than three. I'm gonna less than three you. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Like defining terms, like semantics isn't just like this irrelevant thing. We have to define the terms that we're using. So yeah, I agree. I agree. I hope all of you have a nice Friday. It is still early where I am. It's 10:22, so still early. I'm gonna see if I'm gonna work out today, and I'm gonna lift some heavy things and work on this script. Maybe if I'm crazy, do some work for school. But let's be real. Come on. All right. I'm gonna head out of here. All right, y'all take it easy. And thanks for tuning in. I appreciate the feedback and the views. So thank you very much.